Governor of Ondo State, Lucky Aiyedatiwa, has set up a task force against land grabbing across the 18 local government areas of the state. Speaking at the inauguration of the task force on Wednesday, the governor announced strict penalties for land-related offences, including up to 21 years imprisonment for unlawful resale of property and 10 years for forceful land acquisition or encroachment. Aiyedatiwa also expressed concern over the increasing cases of violent land disputes, illegal occupation, fraudulent resale of land, and the imposition of unregulated charges by some individuals claiming to be landowners, noting that such activities have led to displacement, conflicts, and a breakdown of order in both rural and urban areas. Aiyedatiwa also commended the State House of Assembly for passing a land grabbing bill which stipulates the penalties, including 10 years imprisonment for land grabbing and forceful entry, 5 years in prison or 5 million naira fine for illegal occupation, 7 years imprisonment for violating real estate transaction regulations, 21 years imprisonment for the resale of property without proper revocation, and 2 years imprisonment for collecting illegal levies. Earlier in his welcome address, the State Attorney General and Commissioner for Justice, Aiyedatiwa, recalled that on Monday, December 30, 2024, Aiyedatiwa signed into bill the law that laid the foundation for the establishment of the task force being inaugurated. The commissioner, however, lamented the rising tension and conflicts in communities across the state caused by land disputes, stressing that most communal clashes in the state have lost their roots in unresolved and ownership issues. There's just so much terms attached to this. I just want to get your thoughts. What do you have to make of this?
It's commendable. Land disputes. In fact, if there's anything that causes death in community, it is land dispute. So I think with this in mind, if it's properly implemented, it's going to reduce such. People are too greedy. Land you don't have any history about, you want to grab it, you want to get it, you want to sell to unsuspecting clients. It's an improper thing. So I commend the governor if this program will be sustained and justifiably implemented. It will go a long way in quelling some of the disputes among communities and also stopping these selfish individuals who have turned themselves into found a new occupation, land grabbing. It's also in Port Harcourt here, in River States rather. A lot of places people are crying out land grabbers here and there. Some people just connive because they're into real estate. Certain individuals in the community to sell community land without proper following the due process. So, I commend the governor and other governors should emulate this.
Okay. I wanted to, refer to the parts you talked about real estate and real estate agents, real estate owners, or real estate firms, real estate companies that get involved in this. Aside the parts where there has been prison terms and fines that will be regulated based on your offenses, we've had cases of someone say, I bought a particular property from a family individual, from a family, let's say the first son of the family, and it's a genuine property, but there's been disputes in that situation, and then some of the family members could say this land is not supposed to be for sale, and then it's been sold. And in that situation, the buyer refuses to refund you've talked about the parts that most of especially River State is also affected. Not just River State. I think it's literally almost parts of the country, because we've had cases like that, like you referred to, the parts where oftentimes it leads to losing of an individual ends up dying because of a particular land or a property. In that case, is the government supposed to get involved in situations like that?
Of course.
In what way? Like I mentioned, when it's about a particular family situation.
Yeah. Number one, what is the function and duty of responsibility of government? Is it not to secure life and property? Property includes the land. Going by the Land Use Act, every land is, even according to the Land Use Act, is.
I need to know how the government come into place to play in such situation. I don't know if you understand what I said here.
Okay.
A family that own a land or a property, and then they have a son, a first head. Let's say the father is no more, and the son sells this land to an external person, a buyer,
without the consent
of every other person in the family. And then there's been disputes, because this is literally, aside the parts where it's literally based on land grabbing, there were other offenses that were mentioned, revocation, occupying properties and levies and all of that. Situations like this where it's a family situation, and then let's say the buyer refuses to refund, is the government supposed to come in that kind of situation?
The government you are talking about, is it not
the courts, the police, and all of that? Yes,
of course. That is, you settle your dispute in the court, is it not? Okay. Yeah, you settle your dispute via the court. So there's no limitation to what the government can do in restoring peace and order in the communities, in the states, even in families. There are no restrictions. So when some people think that their rights have been usurped, you fall back to the courts for the settlement of such disputes. Well, it is a common thing that most times one individual from the family, either due to his connection or the other, may decide to sell a family land or a community land. At that time, there will be dispute. The rest of the family members, if not properly carried along, will reject it. And that is how the dispute comes. And there is no other rightful place for such to be handled except through the judiciary, through the courts. So it's not a question of why should they. The government owes it as a duty to protect the lives and property of her citizens.
I wanted to ask, referring to the government, we've had stories or situations of individuals oftentimes calling out certain governments and saying that their lands have been grabbed. Sometimes there could be disputes in a particular property where the government gets involved and revoke a particular individual property. Let's say we've had cases of, I don't know if you've had cases of that, and especially the parts where Aiyedatiwa has taken decision to, as a government come into play on that. How do you call that? How do you, I really don't know how to put it. I'm trying to, make it make sense here. Let's look at a situation that an individual possesses a property and the government gets involved in that property to probably grab the property or revoke that property. How would the law come into place in that?
An individual or government?
An individual owning property.
Okay.
And then the government decide to take ownership of that property?
Yes, most times such is done. They say for the good of the community. Either probably the government wants to use that particular land to site a project.
So what if that person, the owner, refuses to let go of that, and then it involves that? We've had cases where it could involve a lot of
there
all
are
of that.
processes
Okay.
of doing that. The government cannot just come and
Forcefully take ownership.
No.
Okay.
You can't be a lawmaker and a lawbreaker.
So you've not heard of stories of say government forcefully taking ownership of some properties?
Forcefully. Most times when there are no adequate compensation, they begin to cry that the government has forcefully taken. Or most times, look at what happens to the governor. Every land belongs to the government too.
Please, can you make me understand what you mean by every land belongs to the government?
Every land belongs to government. You are only holding it in trust for the government. So
I don't get that, please. Can you elaborate more on that particular sentence?
Chidimma, you as a person, the government owns you. Are you getting it?
Okay.
Your parents are only taking care of you for the government. Do you understand that?
I'm listening. I'm here to understand it. Maybe when you just continue, Barrister Koro.
Every individual is a property, is under the custody of the government.
Okay.
So is the property and the land.
When you refer to every individual under the custody of the government, custody is an elaborate.
Let me come. That is why if a parent is maltreating a child, even if it's their biological child, okay, and it gets to the hearing of the government can intervene by taking away that child from you.
Okay.
Is it getting clearer to you now?
Okay.
Not okay. So, because you belong to the government under the custody of your parents.
In this instance, it's a literal. I understand where you're coming from.
It's practical.
I understand where you're coming from, but
Okay.
Yes, I get all of that statements that you've made. But when an individual, welfare of an individual, protection of lives and property is a duty of the government.
Responsibility,
like you stated,
yes.
The responsibility of the government. Welfare. But we're not going to go to that, to an individual situation.
Okay.
We're still talking about the land situation here. I know why you refer to the land situation, because you said that all the lands belong to the government.
Yes.
I'm sure that was why you refer, because if we have to go to the welfare of an individual in the society, we're not going to leave this because this studio, because it's going to be a longer conversation. But
it's not practical. You don't believe in it. You are not seeing it happening.
Let's go back to the land grabbing situation of when I talked about the parts where an individual own a property and the government wants to claim ownership over that. Although you have justified that claim by saying the government own every property, that's every land in your statement. Yeah. That's why you made that statement. That's okay. But I'm not practically a traditional person, and then we know where how they place all of these things. You know, when someone say this property belongs to this person, this property belongs to this person, under the name of this person. So how does the government get to own a property? Oh well, let's say, okay, we agree with your statement. In that instance, this particular property would be under the name of an individual. So how does the government get to play into that? I really don't understand.
Who satisfies you that you are the owner of a land? When you buy a land, you're supposed to go and register it.
You know the times of our forefathers. That's why I'm saying that I'm not a traditional person, but I know the times of our forefathers. They were not placements like this where you register properties. You just say this land belongs to this man, this land belongs to Konko, and that was how lands were shared. And I'm just trying to fall back to time past. You know, I really don't know how the government got to play into land property and properties ownership.
Okay, you mentioned it. Things evolve.
Okay. So during as evolution increases,
we started having a land use act in Nigeria. I think from 1978. 1978. That is when we had the Land Use Act. So that stipulates, the Land Use Act stipulates the relationship of government and individuals and communities in land ownership. So probably before then, before the act, the so-called forefathers owned everything. You know, the moment every law comes into place, things changes.
So in that instance, when it involves
in Nigeria,
collection,
let me also refer to something. In Nigeria, there was a time we used to drive by the right side, but that law was repealed, and we now drive by the left. That was why you no longer see vehicles that carry right steering. If you bring it to Nigeria and police sees you, it's a problem. Beginning from the time it was repealed. So that is how the law works. The law does not work in retrospect. Before, it's from the present, from the time it's enacted into law. It begins to take effect from that time. Your great-grandfather owned a very large expanse of land before the enactment of that land use decree or act. So by the time that law came into power, it's no longer like that. That is why when you buy your land, you have to refer back to the governor to issue you certificate of occupancy to authenticate it. Not Mr. Wankwo that sold the land that will authenticate that. It is the governor. Are you seeing a nexus, a connection between the government and individual lands and community lands?
Okay, quickly, I wanted to ask, when since the governor gets involved because of the Land Act policy that was established, if that's the revocation of a property now engages, where I talked about where the government, you know, a particular government gets to forcefully claim ownership of an individual property. Okay. Does the law still come into play?
Yes, you can go to court if the proper things were not done. You know, I think we saw that happen when Abacha claimed a particular property at Aba Road. You know, the almighty Abacha claimed that, but the man went to court because due process was not followed. Abacha acquired that land. I think, is it Deprier land or property or whatever? The first place that NDDC used in Aba Road, this thing, he acquired it without due process. And he acquired his own personal use, not for the good of the people, but for his own personal use. He went ahead to build that place. And the court said, no, that is not the law. You don't grab someone's property like that for personal use. And the land was revoked and given back to the rightful owner. At that time, the building was already erected. He inherited. So if you feel that a governor cannot just come to a place because the land is in sight, I come with the name of government, you want to use it not for the people, but for your personals, for yourself. The people have the right to go to court to challenge that.
All right.